Well, good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, depending upon where you are in the world, and welcome to today's DevOps.com webinar. I'm Charlene O'Hanlon, moderator for today's event, and I welcome you. As always, we have a great webinar on tap, but before we get started, we do have a few housekeeping items we need to go over. First of all, today's event is being recorded, so if you miss any or all of the event, please know you will be able to listen to it again and watch it. Later on today, we will be sending out an email that contains a link to access the webinar on demand. And we are taking questions from the audience. So if at any time during today's presentation you have a question for our panelists, please do not wait. Don't hesitate. Just use your GoToWebinar control panel and submit your questions. And we'll take as many as we can by the end of today's webinar. All right, with that, we will go ahead and kick off today's webinar, which is enterprise-grade DevOps solutions for a startup budget. Our speaker today is Richard Clark, who is Senior Solutions Engineer at JFrog. Hi, Richard. Thanks for joining me today.
Hey, thanks for having me.
Great. Before you get started, I do want to let the audience know also that we are going to have a polling question during today's presentation. So hopefully we'll get everybody involved and engaged. And with that, I'm going to go ahead and put myself on mute and let you get right to your presentation.
Thank you very much. So as you see, I'm Richard Clark. I'm a Senior Solutions Engineer at JFrog. I've been at the startup market for 20 years now. I've worked at various companies, from everything of a startup of one, which is a company that I ran, all the way up to some initial companies being the first technical sales hire, to companies that grew from up to 20, 25, 200. And at JFrog here, we have over 500 employees. So I've pretty much seen it all in a variety of markets. I've worked a lot in the Internet of Things space, and also building hardware and software components. So I'm going to try to share some of those best practices with you and how it applies to the DevOps field. The agenda that we're going to cover today is essentially what is DevOps and why is it so important for startups. We're going to cover a playbook for success, so everything that you're going to need to set up your first DevOps infrastructure. We're going to talk about why binary management matters. We're also going to talk about some of the security options in terms of scanning your code, making sure that things are safe to consume for your consumers. We're then going to discuss some of the different cloud options available to you, as well as the ability to maybe get started with a trial using a cloud offering that we offer. So in talking about startups, I always love to start with a slide like this. This is essentially pretty much sums up the experience of running a startup, whether you're flying solo or building a small team and scaling up. On the far right side is the enterprise focus, and this is where we all want to be. And getting out of that trough of sorrow is a long and tedious process. You'll see at the bottom of that, you're always experimenting and pivoting. Your ideas change constantly. And once you actually get that aha moment to actually find that massive product market fit, that's when you start to bring on more team members and try to really bring it to scale into a production environment. And using the tools that are available to you, there's a lot of options out there, right? So in the startup that I built, I was sole founder. I started off writing the code on my own. I started to build a prototype, and you'll see that coming up with that product idea was of paramount. This is how you get started. Identifying what you need to actually build your product idea. So I had decided to build actually 3 different components to build my product. The first being a hardware IoT device, essentially using off-the-shelf components that I could use to really maximize the budget that I had to work with, and that was essentially the money that I had in my bank account. Writing software, typically done by a tech co-founder. In some cases, you need to do that yourself until you bring on more team members. And then building a cloud instance, right, to be able to handle that back-end logic to actually make the system actually work. You definitely need to be resourceful, using all the tools and resources at your disposal. So building hardware, there's a lot of off-the-shelf components that I started with to build my MVP. I was able to build the software stack, and since I was starting off new, I could decide exactly what I wanted to use for my environment. Since I was doing a lot of embedded development, I had decided to do some C and C++ code. I was using Python for all of my backend analytics to actually crunch that data to make that service options. And then I had done some work with Node, so creating different front ends. I had also had some Android and iOS apps. And of course, I wanted to modularize everything, create a set of microservices that would be easier to maintain over time. You also need to leverage existing assets that you have, and sometimes this is, team members, friends that you've counted on for a while, as you're building your prototype to be able to take it to production. And then of course your budget, right? So whether you're bootstrapped or you have some initial seed funding, there's a lot of options once you actually do have that first proof of concept built, being able to build 100 prototypes to test with your friends and family and potential investors, really to validate the product that you're building. Software can really creep up on you in terms of costs. Starting to use the cloud options like this can, unless you're monitoring it, it can really outgrow your budget. So you really have to be careful with that. And as well as hiring on different development teams, having UI, UX design, hardware engineers, more developers, biz dev, marketing, and IT organization. All of this stuff takes money, and unless you have that money, you can kind of get stuck in that trough and your product never takes off. So this is where, let's just assume that you get some funding through events like TechCrunch Disrupt, or maybe you go through a Y Combinator program, any of the options available to you. How can you spend that money wisely? Well, some of the options you could do, right? You could throw a big party on Alcatraz, invite all your friends and family. That would be fun, right? That will burn a lot of cash. We could invest in a swanky new office with glass walls, right? We could buy a sweet new car with doors that open like this, right? These are always options available to us. And this, what happens is this nets just enough cash to cut corners on infrastructure. What could possibly go wrong here, right? So being able to be scrappy here. And instead, let's invest that money wisely in building an enterprise-grade DevOps solution. And this is the topic that we're going to cover here. I'm going to share some of these best practices with you so you can get up and running. So why would we invest in DevOps? Well, the main goal is to release new features to market more frequently. We want to be able to iterate very fast and quickly. We want to be able to adapt to changing in market conditions, being able to stay ahead of your competition. Maybe you're designing a new product in a new space, or you're going after an existing space, right? These are all options available to you. You need to be quick and agile in terms of building your system. You also want to focus more on innovation and less on infrastructure. You never want to have a bunch of legacy systems to maintain. You want to always use new and modern infrastructures. This essentially makes your life easier for everyone in your organization, whether it's your product owners, your developers, your create team, IT operations. We also want to automate everything. So as you can see, most companies that actually do adopt DevOps practices can scale ahead of the competition. It's very easy to maintain this and add on new systems and new partnerships. Having infrastructure that can grow with your organization is imperative. So what do we need to actually get started with all this? Well, I'm going to talk about some of the components that are necessary for you. So in terms of building a state-of-the-art DevOps infrastructure, it always starts with source code, right? So in terms of when the prototype that I built, I was writing my own source code. I would version it by creating zip files in my local environment or tar it up, upload it to GitHub, and have that system of record where I had the version of code that was stable for the version that I had built. And then I could use that to distribute to other team members. So when we got ready for events to be able to show our prototype off, we had to basically integrate the code and run into challenges where, unless I had packaged all the libraries together, we could run into discrepancies between two different build environments. So managing source code is one thing, but also managing those binaries is another. Being able to have a full record of everything that you're using to generate a build. So whether I'm doing the build now or 2 months from now, I need to be able to reproduce that as I bring on more team members. Automating the process is is part of the system of a continuous integration server, like taking all the different source code options, binaries, and being able to generate those builds using a variety of tools. Also being able to vet that with some security scanning options, right? This is very important so that your code is tested and verified. You never want to be that company that had a big memory leak or lost some customer's data because of a violation that was introduced into your code. And then in terms of building hardware, like having ability to take firmware images and binaries and distribute them out, doing that continuous delivery so that if you have a factory in Taiwan that's producing your hardware, being able to produce firmware images and push those out to another region and have another team develop it, test it, load it onto actual hardware, and then distribute it back out to production. These are all important options. So what I think we'd like to do now is the poll. So hand it back over to you.
All right, great. So we'll go ahead and push out the poll here. So it should be hitting your screen right about now. The question is, what type of DevOps solutions are you using today? So you can choose from one or more of the following. So you CICD server, binary repository manager, software composition analysis, containers, Docker, Kubernetes, etc., or none. So go ahead and make your choices. We'll give you guys about 20 seconds longer to make your choices, and then we'll push out the results and let you guys take a look at them. And while we're doing the poll, I do want to remind the audience that at any time during today's presentation, you have a question for Richard, please go ahead and use your GoToWebinar control panel and submit the question. You don't have to wait until the question and answer period. Okay, with that, I'm going to go ahead and close out today's polling question. Looks like we've gotten everybody in that we're going to get in. So closing it out, and here are the results. Looks like the majority of folks are using a CICD server, which I guess it's not too surprising. But how do these results kind of stack up with what you're seeing out there in the market, Richard?
Oh, this is fantastic. I was hoping to see some of these results. So we definitely love to see that people are using CI/CD processes in place. A lot of people are doing containerization. We do have pretty good percentage using binary repository managers, so that's also excellent to see.
Yeah, although that none at 32% is a little unnerving. I don't know about that. Maybe we can make some change some minds with that one.
Yeah, we'll give you some best practices here to help.
Awesome. All right, I'm going to go ahead and hide the results and let you get back to your presentation now.
Excellent. Awesome. So thanks. As you know, there are many solutions out there. This is, I mean, if you search for DevOps ecosystem online, you'll see all sorts of graphics. This is actually pretty much sums up. There's so many options available to you. So how can you take that limited budget that you have to work with and decide how to build a process? It can get pretty confusing and daunting, right, as you're starting out. But as a startup, you have the ability to decide what you want to use. And your budget can only go a long way, so selectively picking maybe 1 to 3 options just for your initial environment is very useful. And you'll see the different options that's called out in each section. And I'm going to go through some of the components and how these actually fit in and tie in together. So what I would like to cover next is actually understanding the full CI/CD process. So a good percent of you, 60% actually now in the poll, looks like you are using CI/CD processes. So a lot of this will be familiar to you. The ones that have never done it or that have selected none for DevOps, this will be pretty interesting to see because it will walk you through the process of what happens in the CI/CD process. So it always starts with the development team. So again, if you're a developer of one or you have a large team of developers, each developer has their own set of options. A lot of them are using their own command line tools. Some are using IDE environments like Eclipse, IntelliJ, VS Code, or the native package tools that come with each package type that you select. So as I mentioned earlier, when you're building your product, deciding those package types that you're going to be developing with are very important. This can actually help you steer the direction in selecting those vendors from that big ecosystem map. So being able to define those packages and all the dependencies related to it, even if you're doing things like Java builds with Maven or Gradle or Ruby gems, all those options are available to you, declaring those dependencies. Once you do declare the dependencies, you leverage a binary repository manager such as Artifactory, and being able to commit your code and run those builds locally and caching those artifacts is very important. If the dependency is new and was never used, we basically can use that to resolve the dependencies from remote repositories. So caching those third-party libraries, things like JCenter or Maven Central for Java, or NPM or Docker Hub. These are all options available to you, or maybe you're a Windows house doing NuGet.NET development. And once you define and resolve those dependencies and cache them in Artifactory, the build will proceed, and essentially you will then commit those changes to source control. And it's really the next step for the continuous integration server to take that source code that you've built, all that version of code. So I just checked in my prototype code, right? So this could be, maybe my prototype consisted of some NPM modules and had some Java components and some of those embedded modules for the hardware side that I had built. Leveraging existing CI servers will actually take that source code and it'll basically check to see the changes that are needed. It could even do a git pull, or grabbing that source code, grabbing additional dependencies to kick off a build to actually go ahead and actually resolve additional dependencies. So the CI server will be aware of all the artifacts that you've defined in order to build your binaries. In a variety of package types, as you can see, on the left side, the dependency managers match up with the build tools that the CI server also has access to. Once those dependencies are found, if the CI server needs to pull any from a local cached copy, then that's where the binary repository manager sits, right? So you have ability to cache those artifacts. This really gives you some safety net in terms of using packages from the internet, libraries that may no longer exist. Let's say your build worked fine today, but 6 months down the road, you rerun that build, but you can no longer find that library. Having that cached in Artifactory is important because now you can proceed with your development and there's no loss of downtime when you're doing these builds. You always want to have fast build times and high availability for everything that you do in your organization. Once you're successful, the CI server will actually build those components and it'll store all the build info, all build materials, so everything that's in that build, the binary, everything from your build info indicating who ran the builds, when it was run, how long it took, what dependencies it used to actually create the component. What if you're doing Docker containers, what layers were introduced, what changes have been made. Tracking all that build information. The binary repository manages your system of record for all of the things that you do. And now you have a record going forward to identify code and be able to compare differences between one version and another. We might also need to be able to contribute other metadata. So if we're passing a build to another QA team or another testing service, being able to do that again from the Artifactory server through the CI processes. You then have the ability to actually take those artifacts now that they reside, the binaries or individual third-party libraries exist. We then need to push those out to production. So whether you're doing those Docker containers and you're distributing out using all the tools at your disposal, maybe you're moving over to Kubernetes for deployment, doing some Chef or Puppet, Ansible options, everything's available to you. And it's really up to your company to decide what they want to do and where they need to push it out to production. You could also be doing some work with, as I mentioned, in terms of like building IoT devices, being able to take those binaries and distribute them out, sending that image out to another factory to be able to do that immutable firmware image loading onto the hardware components. So having a distribution network to be able to push these out up to the edge is very important. It's also the entire CI/CD process is important as you bring on more teams and more distribution centers. Starting off with that initial example, like being a sole developer, bringing on more teams, maybe hiring an offshore team, having the ability to have all the binaries, all the artifacts that I'm consuming be available in any region where my developers are located. So in DevOps, we try to follow the 12 factors as much as possible. So everything from, doing your code, running your tests, checking those dependencies, storing all the configuration environments, right? Running the ability to monitor and test your code and be able to scale up. These are all options that we need to actually work with. So in terms of, summarizing the components in that CI/CD diagram, so we have our source code management, our record of all the source code that were used for development, and having that ability to version it and track those release notes. So you always want to have that record as you bring on more team members over time. The full record, obviously documenting your code is also imperative. The wall between Dev and Ops kills the speed, essentially. So your developers build that proof of concept. We have your code that runs, and then of course we dump that over the wall. This is what happens, right? And then the Ops team has to then deploy it and find a way to actually manage that software and get it out to the field or run through their QA tests. So this can get pretty tedious. It can also upset a lot of employees as the processes get broken down. And we need to be able to integrate and do this much faster. Tying in that binary repository manager in the center, being that source of truth to be able to have your dev and ops teams work better together, being able to identify what needs to get done to actually make this code safe to use and consume. The binary repository manager, again, it's your third-party cache, your system of record for all the artifacts that you're building with. It's critical to the CI/CD components and the software development lifecycle. We track everything in the system of record, everything from those third-party libraries to your own artifacts that you produce in-house. All of that build info objects are all the results that are consumed with the builds. And then any in-house plugins you're doing, any custom proprietary code that you're doing, all that system integration work that you do to make these things happen. Artifactory does a great job at managing this. And of course, each binary repository manager has its own options for the packages that it can support. So it definitely encourage you as you select vendors for your DevOps ecosystem, consider the package types that you're going to be working with. Make sure that the vendors that you select can support what you need and available to grow with your organization. Having the option to maybe even leverage more than one instance. A lot of our customers will use multiple Docker registries. You have a Docker Hub or ECR, ACR, GCR, all the different cloud providers offer different Docker registries. Being able to integrate these with the various package types that you develop is very important. It's also good to be able to swap some of these out. Maybe over time, you add a new package type, you may need to switch systems or switch to new registries. Having links to other third-party library caches and be able to manage those, or distributing your code out from local and remote distribution teams. The CI server, again, it takes everything that you have from your source code that you're storing, such as on GitHub, to all those binary artifacts. Having the ability to initiate scanning stages, like having options to take your source code and analyze it for vulnerabilities throughout the CI process. Being able to fail builds if you encounter any issues. CI can handle this load so that your builds never make it into production. CI can also pass this on to the CD side of things, so be able to distribute that out throughout the network. And there's many vendors here in the CI space, and there's a lot of consolidation happening as well. The best thing you can do is to select solutions that work well together, and there are many options available to you. So now we'll talk about the promotion pyramid. So essentially promoting your builds, as you're doing development, there's a lot of builds that happen early on. Every developer has their own development environments. They test their code in a local environment, then they push that out. And having different stages of your software development lifecycle, everything from your dev release. Now I've vetted my code. Maybe I just finished building my POC. How do I take that code that I just produced and check that in to source control, check those binaries into binary repository manager, being able to pass it on to a QA team so that they can run their tests. If they find an issue, maybe they punt it back to the engineer, and the engineer needs to resolve that again. So now I might be reiterating that. So my builds now, what I thought was working well in my environment might not have worked with the rest of the system that we built. So you'll see a lot of the development builds, there's a larger amount in the development side. And as you go through and actually vet those out, now the QA team just gave their blessing on the build I just produced. Then they would then promote it to staging. So now I could do my initial friends and family trial, right? Being able to test my product and then iterate quickly, right? Maybe I find some problems with, maybe it was a UI problem in the app that I had created, or maybe it had a problem crunching the data on the backend side of things, and being able to change just those individual microservices instead of the large monolithic components. Finally, I can get that production ready build, right? I've done my test with friends and family. Now I'm going to produce much more of them. I'm going to open up my beta trial. So now I have like hundreds, thousands of users, and having that build fully qualified and tested in production. Now, what about security, right? So how do we make sure that everything that we're building is safe to consume? So as you can see, and I found this when I was building my startup as well, is that 90% of the code that you build typically is using open source components. And you then create your additional custom code on top of that. Now, it doesn't matter how good my code is at that 10%. If I'm consuming some code that's vulnerable and I'm introducing security vulnerabilities in production, this is a major problem, right? So we want to be able to follow the shift left philosophy and be able to test this in our development environment before it even makes it into production. Offering options such as tying in with your IDE environment. So whether you're using VS Code or IntelliJ or Eclipse, having the ability to actually see the artifacts that you're building, identifying the ones that might be vulnerable, and then swapping that out with a newer version of code that's more stable. Getting the remediation options and being able to do that so that now your code is vetted and safe and secure to consume and distribute out to production. There's really a couple different options in terms of security scanning solutions that you should start to consider. The first is static code analysis, like taking that source code that you have, identifying the defects that you have before you run the software. We also have component analysis, being able to take binaries, everything from our npm, debian, dockers, rpms, our Maven builds, taking those apart layer by layer, identifying individual components that might be problematic. Maybe I have other references to that in several binaries that I have in my system. Being able to identify all those components and then remediate them so that now future builds that I do are vetted and safe and secure. All of the vendors that I listed here are just some of them that are in the industry, and they all leverage different databases. The database is important to identifying the CVE and license issues related to all the code that you're building. It's recommended that security databases get updated daily. Needs change, vulnerabilities get discovered on every day. So having a source of record that actually can scan this stuff in real time and tying this into your CICD processes is very important. So this all sounds great, right? So how do we get there? How do we retain the velocity without sacrificing security for our builds? How can we integrate with all the different platforms that are out there? How do we tie into existing systems that we might have in place? Maybe I have a legacy system that's the build server for what I'm doing, and I need to be able to keep using that because it's an old hardware device that I still need to maintain as a product. You know, how do we put in place a new component that can help us scale for success, and how to tie in both of those together, right? So we also have a lot of, as a startup, it's also being ability to tie into other partnerships, being able to work with other companies. So maybe there's a new package type, or maybe there's a new hardware device that you want to integrate with that has a REST API. Having the ability to integrate all these solutions is important. So at JFrog, we've taken a unified approach to our platform. We've tied into integrations with all the CI/CD vendors that are out there and all the package types. We support over 27 different package types, which makes our solution truly universal. You can integrate with existing systems that you already have in place. We can tie into security scanning, right? Being able to do that component analysis and taking the artifacts that you build and scan them. We offer several different hybrid and multi-cloud solutions. So being able to start, maybe you have an on-prem instance that you're running, or a cloud server that you have, you know, building your PLC to manage that. Tying into the full ecosystem of all the CICD processes is important as well. So being able to quickly switch out new components. You know, your budget can only go so far, so sometimes you might need to pivot from one expensive solution to one that's more affordable. We also need to make sure that things are highly available and available for all your consumers. This could involve, you know, leveraging multiple cloud options, or having multiple regions with DR failovers. Our company's been around since 2008. We have actually about 6,500 customers now, with over 500 employees. In our product, our key product, a lot of customers know about, is Artifactory. This is really JFrog's core product. It's the binary repository manager for all the stuff that ties into your CI/CD processes. And we have many other components that are available to you throughout the SDLC. So what I'd like to do next is actually run through a basic cloud demo to illustrate some of the facts that I talked about, and how it applied to essentially the PLC that I built. So in terms of the cloud options, we're going to show is the option for the Artifactory for Cloud Pro. Just 1 second. Okay, so here you can see my Artifactory instance. So getting started actually with cloud instance. So obviously different authentication methods are available to you. So when you start a trial with us, you have the ability to actually do that. In this case here, I have a Google OAuth integration. So I can log in to my Artifactory instance, and you see from this main panel here, this is our Artifactory dashboard. We provide you all the basic information from our user guides, our support portal, all of our REST APIs, our blogs, all of the package types that we support. You can see down here at the bottom. We also have ability to view all the integrations, and you know, maybe you're deploying some new service, having the ability to actually view all this helpful information in here, whether using Ruby gems or Debian here. You'll see on the right side all the recent builds that have been deployed from my CI server or from my command line tools. We also have the ability to view the artifacts that have been downloaded the most from my development teams. Under the admin side, the first thing I want to start with is actually the repositories. Like, how do we define the infrastructure that we're going to be using to do our builds? And so selecting the remote repositories, you'll see all the different package types that we support. So for my first prototype, I was actually building NPM modules, and we give you the ability to tie into an external registry with a test button here to make sure that you can connect to it. And you can see here that I have ability to actually create a test environment for this. So if I want to call my product KBox, so this is a magical IoT box that I'm creating. I'm going to call it KBox Remote. So this is our remote NPM libraries. At the bottom here, you'll see an option to actually turn on X-ray scanning. So this would be the ability to actually monitor everything that gets introduced, that pulled from the internet, and be able to scan that down to the component level. Then I can create some local repositories. So since I'm just getting started, I'm a sole developer of one, I could then click on NPM, and here you can see I'm going to create one called KBox NPM, and I'm local, so I'm going to call it dev local. And now I've just added my development environment that I'm going to be working with. And now I also just hired my first QA team, right? So I have one QA engineer. So I'm going to go create one for them as well. So we try to follow these naming philosophies so that you have the ability to track to see where artifacts lie. Artifactory is our binary repository manager. It leverages a checksum-based storage, so you can create as many repositories as you like and store these artifacts in multiple repositories, but it's only going to store it a single time. So it's going to maximize your storage costs. And finally, I'll create one called one for, let's just go straight to production, right? So I went from, I have a dev QA, and now I have a prod one. And I'm gonna, again, put a region, so this is my local environment. In order to work with these, what I'll do is I'll just create a new virtual repository. Our virtuals are a link between your locals and remotes. So it gives your developers a single URL to work with. This simplifies development for them. So I'm going to again call this KBox NPM virt. And on the right side here, now you'll see all the repositories available to me. And if I want to filter for the individual repositories I created, here you can see my dev environment. So these are the artifacts I want to pull in the most because it's my environment. I want to make sure I grab all the latest modules that I'm developing with. And here you can see I can also drag and drop this as well. And there's my remote option as well. So if I can't find the artifact in any of these other ones throughout the resolution order, it'll finally go out to the internet for that KBox remote. So this ensures that everything that I build with is tested and done at the right level of the process. And finally, I'm going to deploy this as my default deployment repository because I want to generate my new builds. The QA team just told me I had a problem, so now I can actually generate a new build and pass it back into my local environment. So by having this virtual repository now on the main panel, you'll see right here in the center, this is going to really be your best friend. So if I filter by KBox, so these are all the repositories available to me for my prototype that I'm building. And you'll see here the virtual repository that I created. And what we provide to you is all the commands that you need to work with, whether you're going to be doing builds from your command line, or maybe you want to copy this in and run it from your CI system, either using existing Groovy script for your pipelines or YAML-driven options for your build environment. Having the ability to actually leverage this virtual repository is going to make my life easier because now I can change and I can add new environments. So here you see even everything from the config files to resolving those dependencies, all the command lines that you need to work with these. If I decide that now I'm ready to actually produce an image that's going to be distributed to our factory in Taiwan, I can then go do that. So why don't we go and actually create a new local environment for my team. Let's assume that I'm logged into a another region that I have set up in that. So I'm going to go create this same one that I call npm dev, but instead of local, I'm going to call this dev Taiwan. So now I have a region associated to this that I can then push my artifacts out to. So in terms of changing that resolution order now, if I want to have this team use that, I again could just select my virtual repository and I can add that new environment to my resolution order. So here's that new environment. And since the Taiwan team wants to only take the images from their environment, they would set that up higher in the resolution order. So again, I didn't have to change anything else for the local environments. I'm only changing the virtual preference. So this helps your developers work with this by referencing the virtuals, they're gonna have an easier way to manage their system. So these are the options available to you with Artifactory. It's a good way to get started to actually build your environments. And of course, some of the other components that you get in here. So when you're ready to actually view artifacts, we have a build tree in here. So you could actually filter out your individual repositories. So there's my virtual, you'll see any builds as you publish them will make it into the system. We also have the ability to view the builds from a build browser. So maybe I'm finished building my image from a variety of different sources and I'm going to build it as a Docker container. I could filter by Docker as an example, right? So now this is my new modular service. So I could simply select any of the Docker apps that I have in the system and be able to view that all the references to the image, viewing all the build information, all those environmental variables that I tracked throughout the process, identifying what CI server was used, or perhaps I want to do a comparison with this Docker image. Maybe I produced an image that worked great in my initial friends and family trial, but now I've pushed a new update and added a new component, and now I found that something got broken between version 21 and version 24. So I could go and actually see that all the differences that have been made. And in this case here, you'll see the different Docker layers. And here there's a new web service that I added, and perhaps this had a vulnerability in it that I didn't really catch the first time around. But being able to view this and actually dig in deep, you'll see here we leverage our checksum-based storage, so all the information that are available are in here. And we also have the ability to actually take this and modify permissions. There's a lot of options here with Artifactory you can do, but you could limit your roles and permissions for certain artifacts that you're consuming and building with. We also offer our Xray product. So our Xray product is for the security scanning of that, and we tie in to the existing Artifactory. So all the artifacts that you have with Artifactory are here. We also have the ability to scan that. Our database comes down daily, so we curate that database from a variety of different sources. The biggest source that we use today is from risk-based security, and it's a pretty robust system. It comes in daily. We also have our Xray Dashboard, so we're integrating this in our new UI. So all the Xray scan results will reside in Artifactory. Here you can see this existing dashboard where it shows you the number of components I'm scanning. We have recent vulnerabilities that it discovered, all the packages that have been built. You see here I have some high severity issues that were pushed out and that reside in the system now. Our database synchronization shows here in this panel. As I mentioned, it typically comes down daily. Being able to actually view all the references to the repositories that I'm scanning with Xray. So here's those 103 repositories I'm actively using right now. And you can see here that all the environment variables that are in here. So I have an npm, you'll have an indexing status for all the environments that you're doing. Since I haven't pushed any new artifacts into my KBox repositories I created, I don't see it in the list just yet. but it would certainly show here once new artifacts were introduced. We can also do scans at the build level as well. So again, the builds could happen from your CI server. Once that build makes it into Artifactory, it will also be scanned. Being able to create a set of blanketed policies is where Xray fits in. You'll see here the severities that we have introduced. So our security rule, we could have as many security rules as we like. But if I want to just create a new security rule for high severity issues and apply a CVSS score, I can certainly do that here. I could take a series of automatic actions. So everything from maybe generating a violation to triggering a webhook. We have a webhook plugin in here, so we could tie into filing a JIRA ticket or sending a message to a Slack channel indicating that a build is broken because of a vulnerability that was introduced. We also enable you to notify team members by email or blocking those downloads so that you're preventing your developers from downloading an artifact into their IDE environment. And lastly, we offer the fail build option. So we could actually fail the build right down to the policy level, or even integrate the fail build, the Xray scan result in your CI pipeline. We also have the same thing with license policies. We have the ability to monitor licenses that we're consuming. Those can prevent legal issues. Any legal issues with a startup could really hamper your funding. So being able to ban specific licenses that you know are vulnerable, and maybe you have a competitor that built a similar product and they had a vulnerability, you could ban it right down to the license level and then take those same series of actions here. And once you have all the policies built, you'll see the watches that are available. And taking an example of what I've built with my Docker app, you'll see here this Docker example. I can filter by high severity. And now you'll see a component analysis. So everything that I've built in this Docker image, we've taken it down to the lowest layers possible. You'll see here that I have an Apache struts issue. This is what caused that big Equifax leak a couple years back. And this was located in a WAR file inside a tar gzip file inside of a Docker container. On the left, you'll see all the references of why it was vulnerable, the CVEs that matched up with, all the references to the vulnerability databases that you have in here. And being able to remediate this, being able to identify that, all right, this is a problem, I can then go find out all the locations for this. You'll see here that I have one in my dev environment. I also have one in my main pipeline. So I could then go through and actually vet this and filter out by the fixed versions of my code. So rather than read through all those CVEs, I could simply fix this by looking at the version on the fixed column here. And so if I update to 3.2.2, then rerun a scan, then the issue should be resolved. We also provide all the manifests for all the packages that you're using. So you'll see here on the WAR file, even if I fix that struts issue, I still have a few others to fix as well. So we give you the options to be able to remediate this stuff. So these are the two options available to you for our Artifactory and Xray options. And you'll see here, we have ability for trials with both options. Refresh my page here. Okay. My machine's running hot. So you can get started with a trial at any point in time with JFrog. And our trial offerings, we have Cloud Pro and our Cloud Pro X offerings will be a great place to start. And just bring that up right now. You'll see here under our Cloud Pro, our cloud offerings here, we have the ability to select. This is a low-cost budget you can start with. It's $98 a month for our Cloud Pro, which includes Artifactory. We also have our Cloud Pro X offering, which includes Artifactory plus Xray. And then we can also scale with your organization up to the enterprise level. So it's a good place to start. We offer a choice of cloud providers. So whether you're using AWS, GCP, or Azure, all these options are available to you. So I think right now we have about 10 minutes left for Q&A.
Yeah, we've gotten some great questions in so far. So want to go ahead and jump right on in. But before I do want to remind the audience, there's still time. If you do have a question for Richard, please feel free to just use your GoToWebinar control panel and submit it. Okay, so the first question here is, why would I want to choose a SaaS versus an on-prem solution?
Great question. So obviously the SaaS, as I showed you in the different pricing options, the SaaS is a little bit cheaper to get started. You'll see here it's just a low monthly fee. Our on-prem licenses, typically you have to buy the entire license for the server. So it's an upfront cost. So it ranges in price. Our base model starts about $3,000, so $2,950 for a single Artifactory Pro license. So you're going with a SaaS model. We'll manage the instances for you. We'll do all the upgrades. It's really the best way to get up and running. Very easy to get running. You don't have to allocate any hardware. We do all our hard work for you.
Excellent. Okay. All right. The next question here. Do you include maintenance and upgrades?
We do in our SaaS offerings. So all maintenance and upgrades is included with any cloud offering that you select. And as new upgrades get available, we roll those out automatically for you. We also provide nightly backups and 8 days retention on our cloud offerings.
Okay, all right, great. Next question here. Oh, this is a good one. Okay, so can I get security with this solution at the same budget?
So it is a little bit more. You see here on the diagram here. So with Xray, it jumps up about $400 a month. And that includes our Xray offering in addition to Artifactory.
Okay, all right, great. Okay, next question. What are the resource requirements for me to set it up?
In terms of our SaaS offerings, we do all the hard work for you. You basically go to our self-service portal and kickstart a trial. You will get emailed the credentials to work with the instance that you've selected. If it includes Cloud Pro X, you would get 2 logins, one for Artifactory, one for Xray.
Excellent. Okay. All right. Next question here. Got some good questions. Let's see. Here's a good one. How much does all this cost? Which right. I see the prices right there on the screen, but you know, are there any additionals there?
Yeah. So getting started, obviously the entry pricing is listed here. Our enterprise offerings, this can scale as you grow, and it really depends. The enterprise offering requires knowledge of how much storage and bandwidth needs you have for the builds that you're producing.
Okay. All right. Great.
And you'll see also with our cloud trials, we also offer, you know, a choice of regions that you could select. So whether you're using AWS, GCP, or Azure, we let you choose. You can also mix and match. So you could start off with this US instance and then grow internationally.
Okay, great. So we're about 5 minutes to the top of the hour. So I think we got time for one more question here. And actually what you just said is a good seg for it. Do you support multi-cloud for this solution?
Absolutely. Yeah, we support AWS, GCP, and Azure. You can mix and match those. We even have some customers that are choosing to use 2 different cloud providers. So using AWS on the East Coast, GCP on the West Coast, so that you have a fully high available solution that is replicated.
Okay, all right, great.
And one thing I also wanted to bring up on screen is our our online training courses. We have JFrog Academy. It's a free resource that anybody can use. We have classes on Artifactory and Xray and several other products. And it discusses that in terms of developer level, admins, DevOps engineers. We also have, or if you have a DevSec team, then we have classes for that as well. And they're all small modules ranging in size length from 15 to 20 minutes. So definitely a great resource to get started with.
All right, great. Yeah, I was going to ask you about JFrog training because I know that's something that you guys offer, and it's a great value add. So that's really, I'm glad that you mentioned that as well, Richard.
Yep.
So let's see. I did want to just remind the audience that today's event has been recorded. So if you missed any or all of the event, or if you just want to watch it again, you'll have the opportunity to to do so. Sorry, I see a guy with bees all over his face.
Yeah, I'll leave
get
you
a little
with that.
nervous there.
Yeah.
But the DevOps, this webinar is, in addition to being able to access it via a link that we're going to be sending out this afternoon, it's also going to be living on the DevOps.com website. So you can always go check it out there. Just go to DevOps.com/webinars. And look in the on-demand section, and it should be right there waiting for you. And for those of you who did submit questions, thank you very much for doing so. If we didn't get to your questions, I apologize, but I'm sure that the folks at JFrog will be more than happy to follow up with you offline and get your question answered. Richard, thank you so much for a great presentation. As always, you guys you have some really great stuff going on.
You're quite welcome. Thanks everyone for joining us today.
Yes, thank you to the audience for joining me today. And this is Charlene O'Hanlon, and I'm signing off. Have a great day, everybody.